Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel for another video, and welcome if this is the first video of mine you are coming across. My name is Ashley and I am a homeschooling mom of 4 kids, currently ranging from high school all the way down to elementary school, and I have been sharing my homeschooling journey as a mom, as well as tips, advice, wisdom, curriculum, all the things here on my YouTube channel for the last almost 7 years, which is crazy. So today's video, as you can tell from the title, is going to be how I raised kids who love to read. I do believe that loving reading is a skill. It's something that can be taught to any child. I don't think that people are naturally born hating to read. I really push against that idea or that narrative. So I'm going to share with you guys what I did that I think led my children to be the readers that they are today. Many of you, through watching my content through the years, have noticed how much my children love to read. I want to tell you that a few of my children read around 60 books minimum, probably even more than that, but 60 that they could remember off the top of their head. And I'm not talking about little picture books, I'm talking about some solid books. So all of my kids, all 4 of my kids love to read, and I do believe that I played a part in fostering their love of reading, and that was actually a huge point in our early years of homeschooling, was establishing the foundation for literacy and loving to read. It's an area that I really disagree with how it's done and how it's taught, and the amount of assessments and pressure and tests and all of those things that are done in the public school system. And I think that the fruit of that type of institutional type setting when it comes to reading and measuring progress is very damaging to kids. And then we see children who struggle with reading for their lives, or they just completely don't want to do it ever. And so in this video, that's what we're going to be talking about. So if you've got younger kids, and even if you've got older kids, it's never too late to kind of take some of this advice or wisdom and apply it to your own homes, whether you homeschool or not. All right, so the first thing that I want to touch on is the fact that I never used a teach your child to read program. And I'm not saying anything is wrong with those, but I do think that they can lead to frustration, because your child is supposed to be moving from this lesson to this lesson, and if they're kind of stuck here, then it can be kind of a frustrating experience. So I taught all of my children to read without a program. We basically spent time learning phonetic sounds when they expressed an interest in that, and then we moved on to phonetic blends, like putting 2-letter sounds together, and then we moved on to CVC words, or like 3-letter words, and I used Bob books at that time. If I had a younger child now that I was teaching to read currently in this day when I'm filming this, I may approach it a little bit differently, because there are some homeschooling curriculums out there that I love that have fantastic learn to read type program. But at that time, when I was teaching my kids, there were a few things, but nothing that I really loved. And so I kind of just did it my own way. So no, I did not use a program to teach my kids to read. And the things that I did, that I told you that I did, we did on a very regular basis. So take that as you will. I think that was the first thing, though, that I did to really instill a love of reading in my children when they were young, is that it was a no pressure zone. No pressure. I really never made reading like this, come on, you guys, we have to read. It was never presented that way. It was never set up that way. And the reading experience with my children, whether they were getting it quickly or they were not getting it quickly, or whatever the case might have been per each individual child, because I have 4 and they all obviously learned and picked up things at their own speeds, paces. And, some got it and ran, some it took a little bit longer, but either way, I never made it a big deal. Kids can sense that. They can sense when you're getting frustrated. They can sense when they're not living up to the expectation that you are placing on them. And it can lead to them lacking confidence and getting frustrated. So I think the number one thing that you can do to set your child up to succeed in the area of reading and loving to read, which is being a lifelong learner, right? That's the goal of homeschool, is to teach our children how to find information. Then they can learn anything they want. The world is literally at their fingertips. Once your child loves to read, nothing is off limits to them. They can research anything, study anything, you know, all of those things. So I wanted to set it up right, and I never ever made it stressful, which I think is huge. The other thing is I was very consistent. You cannot expect a young child to begin to learn to read if you're very sporadic in your sitting down to read with them. So we read a ton to our kids, even before homeschooling was laid on my heart by God. We read to our kids every single day, before bed, at nap time. Our kids had tons of books in their rooms. We were reading to them from a very, very young age, probably 1 year old. They were coming and sitting down and we were thumbing through the pages. So reading has always been something that we have viewed highly in our home. We've always allowed our children access to lots of different books. We went to the library a ton when my kids were little. We went to the library story times. And so we just really encouraged reading and books and all of those things from a very, very young age. And I do think that that also helped. So no pressure. Lots of exposure to reading to your children from very, very young ages, I think are all very critical components to raising children who love to read. So that's going even before school age. So the other thing that I do think led to my children loving to read and spending many, many hours of their days reading, which is a dying art, you guys. It really is. My kids get noticed often when we are out in public because they bring a book. If we're waiting in a waiting room somewhere, they are not on screens, they are not on phones. And I cannot tell you how many times an older person has come by and complimented them or made note that they're reading a book, saying something like, well, that's something you don't see very often. And we always take that as a compliment because in this fast-paced, like technological everything world, reading is not something that this younger generation really values. I think many kids, especially if they attend public school, probably have a negative view on reading, and they view it as a chore. They have to read X number of minutes a day and they have to pass this test, and it's just like, you know, they don't learn to enjoy reading in the same way that homeschooling has allowed our family to experience. So reading early, lots of exposure to books from an early age, keeping it low pressure when you do start those lessons, I do think all played a role in my kids loving to read. I did make some notes down here in my phone. The next thing that I do have to mention here, and this is not to shame anyone, so please do not take it that way. It is not my heart. But I have always limited screen time. Like I was just talking about, those people notice children on books because no one sees it anymore. If your kids always have access to something that is going to stimulate the front part of their brain and give them that instantaneous like dopamine rush that we get from being on an electronic or a game, their brain is not going to crave the calming, relaxation that comes with opening up a good book. That it utilizes entirely different portions of the brain and produces entirely different stimulations to our brain. And so you do have to limit your kids' screen time. It's just a fact. It's not even an opinion of mine anymore, but especially if you want them to gravitate towards reading, they cannot always be having access to something quick and entertaining. I can't tell you how many times my kids kids have come to me and said, I'm bored, Mom. And I say, okay, go, I'm sorry to hear that. Or what about that new book you got or something? And they kind of are don't want to do it, or they're not interested. And then I find them 5 minutes later reading for the next hour or so on their own accord. So limiting screen time, I definitely think has helped my kids grow to love reading. The next thing that I want to touch on here is buying good books. Again, with the same kind of idea behind the screen time is the same kind of idea behind the books that our kids read. Now, I know that in the homeschooling world, some people are very, 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 very strict on what books their kids read. They only want them reading, classical literature that has educational value or moral tones to it. And I think that's wonderful. I encourage that and sometimes require those type of books to be read in my home. But one thing that I have seen to be so fruitful is allowing my children to read books that interest them. Once they were well on their way, learning how to read, having teenagers now, I don't let them read anything that is horrifying. Like if they wanted to read Stephen King, I would say absolutely not. But my kids all have their own interests. And so allowing your children to pursue their interests through reading is hands down one of the best things you can do to encourage your kids to love reading. If you've got a 5-year-old who is absolutely in love with dinosaurs, find every single dinosaur book you can and let them read it. If you have a child who loves something else, whether it's science fiction or different, genres, appeal to their interests, because reading and loving to read, you obviously have to be enjoying what you're reading. So my kids have all gone through many, many stages in their interests, and the books that they're reading always reflect what they are currently interested in. Now, as they have become older, I have definitely required certain books at certain times in our school time, and then their personal reading time is all up to them. Again, within certain parameters, because I do obviously pay for every book that enters my home. So appealing to their interest, I think, is huge. On the same hand, though, I do not buy trash books. I just don't. We have our own family standard. It's changed through the years as I've learned new information. My younger 2 kids, especially my oldest daughter, who was in public school until the 2nd grade, she read, Diary of a Wimpy Kid and things like that. That is just it's just horrible. And so I don't let those books be read anymore. And the 3 behind her, maybe my older son read 1 or 2, but the other 2 have never even read those books. And so there's a fine line between appealing to the interest of your child through reading and allowing them to just read garbage, which I do not allow. So I think providing a way, whether it's through a library or whether it's through your own home library or whether it's through purchasing books to the bookstore, whatever it is, providing books that your children are interested in is a for sure way to have them wanting to read, and at the same time sharing with them things that are going to entertain them, but in an appropriate way. So that's my philosophy there. I know some homeschoolers will absolutely keel over and die at the fact that I let my kids read Star Wars books and I let my daughter read Nancy Drew mysteries, whatever they're really enjoying, as long as it is not like profane or, goes against anything that we really value, then I'm okay with them reading it for their personal reading time. And the last little tip that I think really has helped my kids become the readers that they are today is the fact that I still read aloud. I started reading aloud to my kids when they were very young. That's me reading a book out loud to them. And that is something that I still do today. And that might sound funny because obviously I have 2 high schoolers and then a middle schooler and then a 5th grader. They're all very capable of reading, but there is something about listening to your mom read to you, and always the read aloud is a book that I've pretty much chosen. And so it exposes them to a book that they probably wouldn't naturally gravitate towards. And some of our favorite memories in our homeschool have come from me reading aloud. I've read my kids hundreds of books at this point, and I know that that will always be a fond memory for me as a mother, but also them as they look back on their childhoods and their homeschooling journeys once they graduate. Anytime we go to a bookstore, my older 2 especially love to recognize just how many of the classics that are always in children's areas we've read, you know, Stuart Little, Winnie the Pooh, Mr. Popper's Penguins, you know, all those books, Cricket in Times Square, all the, you know, the classical chapter books that most people will come across in their in their younger lives. They really recognize just how many of those we've read. We've pretty much read almost all of them. Black Beauty, you know, I could keep going on and on. But reading aloud has definitely inspired a love of reading in my children. And so those are kind of the things that when I look back on how I fostered and encouraged a love of reading to my children, it was through those things. And I will happily share more. If you guys have any questions on this, leave it down below. But I've been asked this a bunch lately, and I know it's coming from the moms with youngers behind me that see my kids reading, see us sharing books and different things like that, and they want that for their families. And I do think obviously every family is unique, but I think what I've shared in this video would be unanimously agreed with across the board, even if you vary in what content you enjoy or whatever. These aspects of reading really do span whether you homeschool or not. These things will really help encourage your kids to love reading. That was a huge goal of mine in my homeschool, because like I said, once you teach a child to read and they discover that what they want to know is limitless through reading, they can become experts. They can study things out on their own. They know where to go for information. They know how to find information. And raising a lifelong learner is something that I have really strived to do and instill in my kids as we've navigated homeschooling. So I hope this video was a blessing to you. Be encouraged if you are teaching younger kids how to read. Let them sit on your lap. Let them read the same book over and over just because they're feeling confident. Encourage them, be excited with them. Keep it low stress and low pressure for everyone, and your child will take off before you know it. So thank you so much for watching this. Give me a thumbs up before you go if you enjoy these homeschooling mom wisdom videos, and I will see you guys again really soon. Bye, friends.